the world's volatile. And as experienced practitioners, especially, never let go of empathy in your daily life, in your work. It's a differentiator for, a better world. So just never let go of that. As you're learning professional language and understanding the bottom line and the impact from dollars and cents, empathy is huge in everything you do.
Welcome to the Experience Edge, the podcast where we dive deep with industry leaders, pioneers, and CX experts to explore what it really takes to create meaningful customer-centric business impact. So my guest today is Ryan Leveille. With over 15 years of experience representing Fortune 500 companies, Ryan brings a unique approach rooted in servant leadership, which we're going to cover a lot today. And he has a track record of building competitive brands through, and this is a unique thing, collaborating with a lot of the C-suite executives across roles like digital, the CDO, strategy, the CSO, technology, the CTO. And this is a consistent pattern in his resume. But with an experience in experience, design, innovation strategy, digital transformation, and athletics, Ryan has shaped world-class B2B and B2C brands. And such a wide variety of industries he's worked in by balancing the needs of people, business objectives, and technology potential. So through this holistic view of complex challenges, we're going to have a wide-ranging conversation on everything related to service design, customer experience, executive buy-in. But all in all, Ryan is just a fantastic human being. So I am so excited you are here, Ryan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Really excited to be here. You asked the question, what's going to make this better? And just being in your presence is always making my day better. So I appreciate the opportunity. It's a lot of fun.
Wow, that's so cool. So for people listening, they are typically the flies on the wall, right? When we have a wide-ranging conversation. So let's make it entertaining, fun, and also interesting for people to hear everything that you have had the pleasure of experiencing in your wide-ranging career. And we're going to dig into one thing that I think is foundational to what you shared also online, if people want to find it, around the segmentation work you did at Amtrak recently. But before we're going to go into that, the striking consistency in your career you've been at GE, you've been at Coca-Cola, you've been at Amtrak, you've been at Accenture, you've seen a lot of these different types of customer experience design tracks, programs, and work. But what is consistent is that everywhere you are, you seem to find C-suite sponsorship, collaboration, or even better, you got invited by your C-suite peer to run these kind of processes or innovation programs in these companies. So what's the trick there, Ryan? What is it that a lot of your peers in customer experience would like to have, but not always can get? What made you be able to get all of that?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think it's like a lot of things in life. You do a lot of preparation in the background, and a lot of it comes to luck, but you're ready for that moment. I've been very fortunate to be in positions where I am kind of in the ethers of the C-suite in different ways and different times of my life, and taking a leap. I'm not hesitating when you're in those moments. You've had all this prep functionally as experienced designers, as innovators. When you're in those moments where you just take a leap and say, hey, I want to talk to you about X, Y, Z, and you've got your elevator pitch and you tell them about the value props of whatever, you're trying to bring into the company that's novel, that you want to create change. A lot of the foundational stuff that I do is around transformation. So it's really asking the question, being in their presence, being prepared to have that conversation, and asking permission. If you don't ask, a lot of times nothing will happen. And I've always been a big proponent of having that kind of mentality, asking for that opportunity, showing them the value that something like this would bring, and then just kind of meeting them where they are and hitting the ground running.
A lot of people are trained on ask for forgiveness rather than permission. It's interesting that you go for permission first, but what you strike gold with, I think, is you have to have the pitch ready, right? Yeah. You don't get much time. You don't want to have a lengthy, big story on why customer experience matters or why this initiative is important. Can you give an example of something that you did at your time at Coca-Cola or GE that truly made an impression and got you to get what you want really fast?
Yeah, anytime I've had the opportunity to get in front of those conversations, I more often than not have had a couple months or so of like truly trying to understand the company dynamics and trying to connect the dots of where there's the biggest opportunity spaces. Um, and trying to have a use case in my back pocket when I go talk to a C-suite executive. So like, hey, I've been around for a couple months. I'm new here. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's an example. They say, okay, you've brought a problem to me. It sounds like it's something that we need to address. The first thing you need to have is what's an opportunity or a solution that you could come at this with, and create a solve. So I usually try to pick some wicked, hairy thing that's glaring to me, but maybe not to someone else, and have an example and say, hey, here's how I want to go about solving this for the company. So just having one of those examples in your back pocket, and having those examples in your back pocket also takes a lot of preparation. So really trying to empathize with and meet your company where they are. Trying to understand, those hidden insights where you can provide the most opportunity. So as an example, just to give you a real world one and less academic speak, but at my last company, at Amtrak, we were talking about going from a transportation company to a hospitality company, and I'm sure we'll get more into detail for that. But one of the first things that I experienced after immersing myself riding in the trains up and down Northeast Corridor, was that the touch point between what existed in a role as the conductor today, they're there to police your tickets. It just felt very alarming to me, and I've sensed it with my fellow ridership, where I'm sitting next to people and you're scrambling, and you're trying to get your ticket out, and you're like, oh my gosh, I lost my ticket, and it builds anxiety for you because you're like, do I even have the right ticket? Am I in the right seat? And I realized in that a lot of those moments, that the conductor role was having a huge adverse impact on ridership. And if there's a way for us to, and that's before we came up with the vision of going from a transportation company to a hospitality company, but it started informing that, was this conductor has one of the biggest impacts on everybody's experience on the train, that role. And that role just fundamentally needs to shift. And there's things that you can do very quickly to enhance how they engage with customers. So that was one of the first examples that I brought to our leadership and said, hey, look, I've been riding the rail for the last 3 months. This is what I'm experiencing. Gave them anecdotal evidence, some sort of quantification of what's going on. Leveraged some of our CSI metrics at the time, where conductor experience is one of our top kind of movers or variables that we need to think about. And just said, hey, I have some ideas of how to bring this to life. And to bring this to life, to change the role of the conductor, is going to take a huge lift across departments that we're going to figure out how to phase to get to that concierge model. So just having that little small example of, hey, I've immersed myself, I've identified something that's resonating, I've connected the dots around different data points. And this is a use case that I want to bring to the C-suite and say, hey, this is just one small example among many, and here's how I'm going to go solve it. So lots of prep to get to a use case like that. Lots of prep through your career to understand functionally what kind of, is it service design? Is it, user experience for like a digital product? Is it, Foresight to understand where we want to go? You got to kind of understand all those functions and which one you can lean on to solve the use case that you're bringing to them.
So, in simple terms, what you're actually explaining, I think you're really good at this, right? So, but for people listening to this, I'm seeing a few things, or I'm hearing a few things that are essential to this. So, one is you had your own experience, right? You were with your customers, with your travelers, experiencing this conductor being like a huge burden or problem or opportunity. Mm-hmm. The other thing you had was data. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned the CSI. Is it just the customer satisfaction index, or is this the more like CSI's carrier service index and passenger? Like, what is the CSI?
It's customer service index. So we have like the top 10 variables that there's some loose data. The data that we have access to tries to give us a sense of priority, and we do a lot of work against those, try to move the needle in that space.
Right. So you did your homework. You came prepared, understanding the CSI and how important it was for the business. Then you had the anecdotal evidence. Then you had your own experience to bring that to life, and that is what you brought to the table, including where you found opportunities to start changing these things. So, going back to what you earlier said, we went from a transportation company to a hospitality company. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Today in America and in a lot of transportation experiences, it's very transactional in nature. So you're just trying to get from point A to point B. Through a lot of the things that we were just talking about, leveraging strategic foresight. It was my first hire to Amtrak on the innovation team. It's like, how do we evolve as a company and almost future proof where we want to go? And started to understand there's a great adjacency in the hospitality industry to transportation. So how do we go from this transactional nature of the way transportation's run today as an industry, and how do we kind of blend into hospitality and make it more of an experiential journey that you're on wing to wing, kind of like a Disney experience. So really, it's just trying to take it from a transaction A to B to how do we become a company that's it's part of your destination and experience, not just a mode of transportation to that endpoint.
What is the timeline of going from that initial insight? Like, when you started your work at Amtrak, were you like, okay, this is the holy grail? No? Or how did you come to this? Because this almost sounds like a brand promise. I had Todd Unger on the show, who is the chief experience officer at the AMA, the American Medical Association. And he talks about, like, you need to have a brand promise that you can keep. And this sounds almost like something that can run for the next decade for Amtrak. So I guess this wasn't built overnight, but how did that come to be, like that insight? Like, how did you drive this home? Or was this already something that you wanted to do, or was in the business? How did it come to be?
It's complex. It didn't happen in weeks. It was something that was relatively quick, like as a seed that was kind of implanted through what you just talked about, immersing myself in their environment, truly trying to understand the industry. It took a year and a half. We had cross-functional co-creation workshops over a year and a half period out of the innovation studio. We did 3 different annual trend reports that continuously showed us that, the merge into hospitality was going to be something that could potentially future-proof our company. So Foresight was a big indicator to that. The things we were hearing from our customers through like CSI and anecdotal things, we ingested all of that information, customer data, Foresight signals, employee ideas. We had an employee idea portal where everybody could submit it. And we had a lot of structure and maturity around it. We synthesized all of those data points over a 1.5 year period and continuously put that in front of our cross-functional C-suite. So we had the C-suite from commercial, operations, digital technology, strategy. The functions that represented 80% of the company was helping co-create this and bring it to life over a 1.5 year period. Now, what was magical of it is we were able to leverage things like vision mapping to help create like a visceral view of what that world could be, because it is quite complex. It's not complicated, but how do you go from where we are today to a hospitality company? There's a lot of moving parts. We have a vision map that on the top side is how do you phase over time, and then on the X or on the Y axis, it's actually a flipped service blueprint. So it's the customer journey going down instead of across. And we were able to think about and show in a very visceral way to leadership how you could imagine a hospitality experience of Amtrak in the future. And we created vision videos around it to help articulate that. So yeah, it was a long time in the making. It was co-creation in nature. And like you kind of honed in on, I mean, it had buy-in from, across, 80% of the workforce at the company.
This is an essential thing. You mentioned cross-functional C-suite. Is that, we just had a bunch of those C-suite executives support this and come together? Or was there actually a thing called the cross-functional C-suite? Like what is that in practice?
Yeah. I mean, no, it was not kumbaya from the beginning. Certainly not. It was one of those things where over a year and a half, you continue to bring these different executives in, kind of phased over time. It didn't start from the beginning. I had to go into a road show and have conversations with these folks and say, hey, this is what we're trying to bring to life. We'd love to have your engagement. It took a year and a half to kind of slowly onboard across the different functions to create buy-in. So that's, a big part of the role that I was focused on, is trying to articulate the value prop of doing this type of work, visioning work, leveraging service design to operationalize that type of visceral vision of the future. Yeah, I mean, the last workshop we facilitated in February, and it kind of brought that wing to wing, journey to life. And the first vision map and the first service blueprint that happened in February of this year. And we had just gotten our operational department to partner with us and join us on that journey.
What were some of the objections that, especially in the beginning, I can imagine there's more people skeptical to these ideas as they're not fully materialized? Like, can you give some examples of like common objections and how you handled them?
Yeah, I think it's always trying to, and we talk about it a little bit, it's like meeting each department where they are, So like for the commercial organization, they're much more mature from a innovation, experience design perspective. They have marketing under that umbrella. So it was easy to go to them and say, hey, this is gonna increase our revenue, and talk about, the revenue type of stuff and the experience that we were going to enhance. When we were talking to the operational department, they're not necessarily oriented around quote unquote revenue, right? They're trying to run the railroad as the best way that they can and optimize it continuously with very limited resources. So the way that I articulated, the value prop of participating in this is, hey, you're going to make it easier for your employees by going on this journey. Not only are we going to create a better environment for our employees to be happy at work and exude that with our customers, you're going to see that come to life and articulating it that way. But on the back end, like showing them how when we coordinate across all these different functions within operations to bring something like that to life, they're going to have a better work experience, having an understanding of cross-department work, having an understanding of how my work, in the back, literally somebody in the back house of doing, food, like getting food on the train, how am I like impacting the customer experience? And by being able to articulate, hey, the work that you're doing on the ground floor is truly enhancing the experience of a rider today, and showing them how that maps all the way up to a customer journey touch point. So I think it's meeting different departments where they are. And I just gave you two examples. Commercial is completely opposite in how we articulate the value prop than when we're going to like an operational department. And it's just trying to understand that.
Where did you learn this? Because it's logical when you speak about this, and yet a lot of people in CX think about the customer and only the customer's perspective. What you're doing is you're flip the script. You're like, hey, what matters to the business? How can we tie what we are doing back to you? Like, where did you get exposed to these learnings? Where did that start?
Yeah, I mean, that goes all the way back to my first job. I joined GE right out of college, and I joined into this digital technology leadership program. And it's a 2-year program. You have 6-month rotations, and it helped me understand. And I started as an experience designer in that program, but then I had to be immersed in the business. So it helped me understand like all the work we were doing had to have a bottom line or top line impact to the company. So it helped very early on that I needed to have that type of muscle. So I went on to get an MBA in strategy while I was working full time. And anybody that I hire, and I always try to express this to especially experienced design practitioners, you got to speak and understand the language of the business, like being able to articulate that value prop and connecting experience design to the top line growth or the bottom line for a company is imperative to trying to create buy-in to the work that we do. You have to be able to speak that language. So for me personally, I just, like I said, very lucky timing in life, got into this program that was like a premier thing. It helped give me that experience very early on, but I was also intentional about that learning journey, even to this day. I mean, I took it upon myself to go back and get an MBA in strategy and understanding like what business language is. And when I'm mentoring experience design practitioners, there's a few things that I really, really lean on. Never let go of empathy. That's like one of my little nuggets. Like it's so important as you grow in your career. Don't lose that touch. The second is like really building business understanding, like that business understanding and being able to talk that language with your product managers or whoever it is, depending on what level you are, is gonna pay dividends. And then 3, I talk about the art of facilitation, like just being able to like facilitate this conversation, like facilitating a workshop, facilitating a conversation, having this practical skill set helps you articulate the value prop of like experience design, service design, foresight. bringing those people on the journey. So just been very lucky, but also intentional about trying to understand the impact of the work that we do.
These three seem highly related, right? Never let go of empathy, having a business understanding, really speaking the language, and then having an art to facilitating these collaborative sessions and inspiring people and taking them along the journey. Two of them typically come natural to people working in customer experience, right? Never letting go of empathy, being close to customers, and then facilitation, design thinking, workshops, like that's a big part of the work. And we also like to get trained in it, and that's pretty common. But the business understanding is the least one. Is that also how you would advise your younger self? Is like this was the foundational piece, or this is the most important one, or would you take them in a different order? Like how would you talk to your younger Ryan and say, "Hey, if I could do it again, this is what I would change"?
I mean, it sounds terrible to say I wouldn't do anything different because there's always learnings, and I would little micro differences, but fundamentally, like I think experience designers and the practitioners in our space, innovators, like they're doers, they're the creators, they're the people that bring new products and services and everything to life in the world. Having that, being an expert in this space is a differentiator in itself. It's a craft that a lot of people either don't understand, don't have the natural inclinations to do the kind of work. It's a differentiator in life. So I wouldn't change that. I think having just foundational expertise in the craft of experience design, there's a lot of different types of experience design functions, but having that expertise is foundational. As you grow in your career, that's your differentiator. But as you're growing in your career, you got to just continuously be intentional about how the work you do impacts the bottom line. I mean, our world's right now is driven around, it's oriented around finance, financials and growth and that type of thing. So just being intentional about meeting other people where they are, just like having empathy for your users, it's having empathy for your business. The business helps pay for your life, or like the company you start helps like give you an intrinsic value, but also pays for your life. So being able to speak that language along the journey and intentionally growing those skills is important. But I wouldn't flip it. I don't know that I would encourage, young practitioners to go all in on business. It's just something that you want to be, very intentional about as you go.
Do you recommend taking an MBA in strategy for people as practitioners?
I think it depends on, that's a very big conversation around education in the world and where I think education is going. I think you're going to see less and less of 4-year degrees. I think there's going to be much more micro learnings, certificates, 1-year diplomas, things like that, concentrations. So that's another topic for another day. I think it depends on where you want to go as a experience design practitioner. For me, I was very entrepreneurial. I always thought I'd go start something one day. I wanted to understand how to run a business. So I was oriented that way. I always knew that I wanted to. I've never strived for the C-suite per se, and having a suite. I'm not a title person necessarily, but I always knew I wanted to be able to impact those types of decision makers. So an MBA in strategy for me was important to do that. If you're gonna be a principal, practitioner, I don't know that an MBA in strategy is the right, type of upskilling for you. I think that you can go get a micro certification, and just being intentional about speaking the language and understanding the impact of to the bottom line and top line growth is important. So I think you got to look within yourself and understand where you think your own North Star is, and try to make sure that the education that you're continuously upskilling in matches where you want to go. For me, an MBA in strategy matched where I want to go. I know tons of experienced designers where I'm like, hey, just go take a certification at, wherever, Stanford in product management even, because it talks about the financial impacts. I think that's enough. It just depends on what you want out of your career.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the difference between foresight and insight. It's a big one, and I'm curious how you would explain the difference and why both matter, but how you would apply that. And of course, in your work at Amtrak that you just described, strategic foresight played a big role, but it's different than what typically is considered insight. How are you thinking about these?
Academically, when I talk with other, when we riff on stuff, but it's truly the difference between like inductive and deductive like reasoning. So it's like, how do I think about something and work backwards versus how do I take this problem and work forward? And there's pros and cons to both. And I think as, an experienced designer innovator, I think from both perspectives. So like for me, it's like, deductive. I want to just truly not have any constraints. What is the art of the possible? That's important to give you gravitational direction and options for the future and that type of thing. So it's important to have that type of data set. It's equally as important to understand insight, inductive type reasoning, to meet companies where they are. If you only say, hey, you get these consultancies that come into companies, and I've hired many of them and been immersed in them as a consultant, and they come into these companies and they deal a quarter's worth of a project and they say, hey, here's this awesome package in the future. But then the company that's ingested that or received it, they go, well, that's great. We don't, how do you even get there? Like, what are you talking? Like, where do we even begin? Even when they think that they give them some sort of roadmap, typically from what I've seen, even on the inside, it's not enough to meet them where they truly are, because you can't immerse yourself in the business to really understand and meet the company where they are. So I think the inductive insight is very, very important because it helps ground directional change that you want to create. It's kind of the way I think about it. They're both very, very important. Insights are just trying to help me understand where the companies are, and foresight is just trying to provide gravitational directions for transformational change.
Is this also a language that you bring to a business where at Coca-Cola or GE or at Amtrak, this was actually part of the way you talk about things? Or is this really like something that was only happening in the innovation spaces and important to you and your team?
It's a really funny question because, I'll give an example at Amtrak. When I talk about deductive, inductive reasoning or foresight, when I say the word signal, even risk to a company like Amtrak, it is a foreign vocabulary to a lot of corporate folks, especially in legacy companies like Amtrak. So you really got to, and it's kind of like what we talked about when I'm having conversations with a chief commercial officer or marketing officer versus a chief operations officer. I have to try to meet them where they are and speak their language. It's the same thing when I'm talking about these academic, that's the way they look at stuff that we're talking about. Oh, it's very academic, You really got to try to put it into, and I don't mean this in any kind of derogatory way, but layman's terms. Like just try to speak about it in a way that it contextualizes it for them. And a great way to do that is to give them examples. So I talked to you about, hey, there's the conductor. Like give them an example that they can grab a hold of, like grounds them. Like if you're talking to the chief operating officer, I can say, hey, you've got a conductor role. As soon as I say conductor, they're like, I know everything about a conductor. It helps ground them of what we're talking about. And then you talk about, hey, what are your thoughts? You ask them a lot of questions instead of talking at them, like, try to pull them where you're trying to go and lead them in a way, which is not great if you're doing surveys or something. You don't want leading questions, but try to pull them along on that journey, meet them where they are, ground them in something that they're an expert in with a use case that they can say, oh, I know what you mean when you're talking about, I want to extrapolate to this new future. And I understand like it's going to take, the first thing we got to do is, hey, if we want to evolve that role and you want to give them access to customer data in real time on their peripheral, on their device that they have in their hand. And instead of policing their tickets and checking their tickets, you want to greet them and say, hey, let me give you a free croissant because you're a gold level member and we were 10 minutes late. And you just give that to them as a use case and say, this is an example of what the future could be. And here's a small example of what we need to do to bring that to life. We need to update the data that we pull into and give them access to on their iPhone on the train. We need to update their iPhone. We need to provide additional training so that they have more of a hospitality type language that they use with their customers. So for me, it's just like trying to ground them in something they already are expertise in that's near and dear to their hearts, and then try to show them a very simple way to go from this is an insight of today, like they police today tickets. Let's try to evolve that. What if they could, provide insight to their guests in real time? So it's really trying to like really bring it down to a very explicit use case and ground them in something they're already experts in.
So then what happens is people get excited, but then they also make it complicated again, right? Or complex again, because then they go like, yeah, we need to distribute these iPhones, but we have a contract with this distributor, so that would be hard. Who's going to do the training? By the way, we don't have enough training capacity, and that means that we're going to have to hire a bunch of people, and we don't have the budget for it. And that person, so everything becomes big again. And back to what you just said earlier around, okay, consultancies are these extensive projects that quarters long define the future, and then people don't know where to start. Like, how do you make sure that this actually gets started and continues and actually builds towards that future? Because let's be real, right? Having a bold vision is very easy to create. It takes time, but it's relatively easy. But then starting and continuing on that track is the hard part. Like, what have you done, or how are you approaching it differently that actually makes this work?
Yeah, it's it's a great question. And I love to drill into that. I'll keep leaning on Amtrak because it's the most recent experience. But, when there's a delayed train, so I'll give you another example. So when there's a delayed train in Amtrak, the coordination of trying to solve that and engage with our guests is literally done on pen and paper in a closet with 5 people that get into a room and say, oh, there's a train delayed. What do we do? Like, that's how legacy the organization is. One of the things that they weren't doing, and they didn't document everything. So it's like, we have this broader vision. We want to engage with our customer in a different way. How do we communicate with them? How do we give them update real-time information? And how do we continuously move that needle in that space? So I've told you about a North Star going from transportation to hospitality. We've talked about an explicit example of a conductor becoming a concierge in the rail. When there's an incident and there's a delay, that conductor is the last line of communication to people on the train. We don't do a great job of giving them the right information today. So a real world example of saying, hey, how do we even make the change here? Literally last quarter, we took a focus on there's a train delay, whatever the order of magnitude is. How do we get the right information to the conductor that's on the train today? We ended up standing up just a new process that helped. Literally, all it is updating a process that kind of existed at Amtrak. It was, you didn't have to hire anybody new. You didn't have to give new data to the peripheral on some sort of new tech stack or whatever. It was truly like a process change internally that enabled them to get ahead of what was going on and making sure they relay the right information that we combined internally and fed to the conductor, and they could communicate to the passengers in person individually and provide them an update. All that was a process change. And guess what? That process changed helped the conductor start becoming more of a concierge for the guests on the train. That's a very small example and that's one of the things that we presented. You don't have to go on this multi-year digital technology journey right away. You don't have to hire all these new people. We could come in and focus on some process enhancements that are oriented and enable you to provide a small example of this type of concierge hospitality experience that didn't exist today. And all it was is meeting them where they are, coming in to analyze root cause of what's going on with that train delay and why we can't communicate. Here's a very simple way that we can update them. So it's finding those examples when you have this larger vision and you keep kind of working backwards and getting deeper into an example of what it is, and you try to find the ones that are quick wins that show like, hey, we can do this over time. This had a huge impact we have so many train delays. You're impacting customers every single day by this small process change. And guess what? It's training conductors to become concierge almost intrinsically. And they get it.
If you're enjoying this conversation, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast channel and leave a review. It makes all the difference. The Experience Edge podcast is where I interview business leaders, CX pioneers, and the best designers who share their insight on creating business impact, having an edge on the customer experience. If you want more exclusive content and behind-the-scenes access, check out the Experience Edge podcast on YouTube and LinkedIn so you don't miss a thing. Now let's get back to the conversation. How did you pick the delayed train? Because this is a big struggle, right? You have a big vision. You have all these journeys. or micro moments or micro journeys, however you want to call them. And everything is red. Everything can be improved. Everything can build up to the vision. And I think picking can sometimes be a science, can sometimes be like completely data driven. Sometimes it's gut feel. Like, how do you pick? Like, how did the delay train come up at top?
So it was a few things, always. Connecting those dots. Delay train happens a lot. So order of magnitude, delay trains happen so much in our network because for a lot of different reasons. We don't own the railroad, so we have to move around freight trains. There's construction happening and building new bridges and lines of service. There's just so many variables to why we're late, whether it's 10 minutes or 8 hours. It's one of our, it's a huge problem for Amtrak. So knowing that delay trains is a huge problem for Amtrak is big. It's contextualizing where we're going to focus, right? So the C-suite is going, we have delayed trains. Guess what? Delay trains is one of our CSI indicators that we have to think about. Like, how do we improve that? Delay trains is complex. I just mentioned all these variables. How do you even improve that? Well, maybe you don't need to improve the delay train because you can't stop working on a bridge. Like, it's hard to change some of those variables that are like moving the Titanic. But what are some things that you can do to ease our guest experience when there is something like that? So me knowing that, again, it gets back to just meeting companies where they are and trying to contextualize for C-suite to create this buy-in. It's knowing that delay trains is one of the hugest obstacles we face. We're not going to move it, like change the trajectory of that over the next 10 years. We're going to continue to have delay trains. So knowing that's a big thing, knowing that we want to orient around a hospitality experience. And that's kind of gravitationally where the company's thinking about going. Recognizing through my own experience, because I immerse myself in the environment and empathize with like real world writers and like try to understand what they're going through. Looking at a few of those different lenses and saying internally as a, someone that's steering the innovation team and how do we like focus on one thing and like listen to all these other executives. It's thinking about all those different variables to kind of hone in on something that I know is going to, hey, not only is it going to change the conductor, not only is it going to give them more experience becoming a concierge, it's also going to enhance the CSI of the customer experience when we have delay trains. And guess what? That goes across 4 different executives of the company. So just kind of like, I don't know, connecting all those dots and kind of reading between the lines. You mentioned it. It's art and science. It's just having 10 years or 15 years of experience navigating those connections and sometimes just saying we're going to go this direction and I know that it's going to have some sort of exponential impact. I have no idea if that's the right one or not.
And then the impact of this cuts across many different teams, including the operations, the process teams, or the people responsible for changing these processes. Like, it sounds like you're in the middle of all this change and people come to you and your team to help execute this. How would you advise teams that are not so well connected in the organization to get there? Because a lot of these insights, customer experience teams, they see these things. They can connect it back to the business impact. But then other than like a recommendation, it doesn't go. But you want to make the change and you want to see it happen and you want to see this consistently create this better vision that you're leading into. Like, how did you get your team to be so plugged in and to work with all these different teams to say yes to the things that you're seeing together?
Yeah, great question. I think there's a balance between building some things that you know that are going to unlock a lot of value, kind of incognito. I do a lot of incognito stuff like that, where it's building foundations because I know that it's going to be a thing. I don't know that I recommend that for everybody because there's a lot of risk inherently in it. So I'm kind of like hedging my bets. Like we're building a lot of stuff internally as a team because we know that it's going to be used in 6 months, like piloting service design management on like a platform called Daydo. It's like, hey, I'm building that for 6 or 9 months because I can see, I have the foresight that that's going to impact all the stuff that we're working on and we're going to get there. So some of it's doing that in the background. And it's kind of like what we talked about earlier in this podcast is being prepared for when the opportunity comes. So that's one of those examples of like doing some things to prepare when the opportunity happens. I know we're going to be ready for it. So there's a lot of that stuff that happens in the background. When you get lucky, so we get lucky at an inflection point, you're like, hey, I did all this pre-work. They didn't necessarily know about it, but now it's unlocking this huge opportunity for us. So there's some of that. It's also like, we do a lot of what we call business sponsored work. Very small work streams where we come in for a quarter and it's with a small team, it's a small problem, it's not this big gargantuan vision change. And we say, hey, look, we created impact and we're slowly creating innovation champions. So over a 1.5 year, 2.5 year period, we had a network internally of what we called an innovation champions channel. And you just continuously saw through these little small engagements with teams and, kind of shifting mindsets and creating people that are like going to go and like speak positively about your team and your work. We did that over time, over 2.5 year period. It takes time. And having those quick wins and capturing those people that are changing their hearts and minds and having them be your microphone. So I think, there's no simple answer. It's doing a lot of preparing yourself for that inflection point and having the foresight to understand what those things are, like kind of in the background. It's really trying to get down on the ground floor and roll up your sleeves and show people that are operating the business that you're not just some small team off on an island doing crazy moonshot stuff. Like you're here to help everyday life at Amtrak for employees and our writers. So always doing work like that just builds empathy internally with your employees. It helps them create buy-in. A lot of times we ingest their ideas and they see that our ideas come to life through our work and they're like, oh my gosh, that just like totally made a connection with them for life because they knew that idea was theirs and we partnered with them and brought it to life for them, So those are two things that I try to encourage the team and navigate them and trajectory,
I love that because you're working on a strategic, bigger vision while also serving those teams. And typically, these innovation or CX organizations are doing one of the two, right? They're either like consultants to the business on the vision, or they're just like an internal agency staffing teams with like fantastic people. So what have you seen in like other companies where this is different? Like, how do we think about setting up these teams in the right way?
I think part of it is luck, coming into a company that didn't have a lot of quote unquote innovation debt, having buy-in at the very beginning, my last, not about me, but like my last interview was a CEO. So like he was the sponsor of innovation. It didn't mean every other function believed in it. There's still functions that don't believe in innovation at Amtrak and the value that we provide. So having that opportunity at the get-go was very important. Setting up the team is something that, from company to company, you take learnings and you say, hey, because I've gone across a bunch of different teams at a bunch of different companies, you start reading between the lines and you understand, oh, like I know like service design. I can kind of, I immerse myself for a quarter and I realize service, we don't make anything. We're not an OEM at Amtrak. So it's like, I realize it's about connecting a bunch of different siloed teams, siloed products and services, trying to coordinate all this to create a more seamless journey for our customers. It's just recognizing that was going to be a functional skill set that we need to build muscles within the organization. So part of it is just like experience of learning, through all this journey that we've had, and saying, hey, when we're building something from nothing, here's the structure that we're going to put in place. Knowing that I'm going to have to build some foundational capabilities like an idea management platform. We're going to pilot it and get it going because when employees are ready, that's going to be ready. We fine-tuned it. It's not falling down before we get there. So yeah, I think part of it's just having that experience over 15 years and trying to read between the lines and how you set this up. Every innovation I've been on, team or led or built, has been different. It's been different in every single company. It's the empathy thing. It's that first thing we talked about, right? It's like empathizing with your company and understanding where you got to meet them and trying to read between the lines on that.
It's art and science with your company. I love that. Like everyone talks about empathizing with your customer, but like empathizing with your company, that's essential. Talk to me about innovation depth. What does that mean? I love that term.
Innovation depth?
Yeah.
At every company I've had the, opportunity to go to and luck to go to, it's not like, even in Amtrak, it started from nothing, but there was like pockets of things that are happening. But at every company you go to, it's like somebody tried something, somebody thinks they're doing it, somebody had another experience and was hired at the same time as you. It's like, you've got 50 years of, it's kind of like process debt, like I just kept building this process over time and now it's gargantuan, or I just kept tech debt. I just kept building this portfolio of siloed products, and now I've got like this hornet's nest of stuff that can't interoperate. It's people dead. I've just hired people and they've never grown because there was no like career growth mentality at the company. So it's like, it's the same, orientation around people, process, technology debt. It's innovation debt. Every company's got just little remnants of something, or they started it and it failed massively. So you've got a lot of naysayers culturally at the company because you had a CEO that came in 10 years ago and said, we're going on this innovation journey and we're going to spin it up. And then it was this colossal, just crumbling with like in a couple days. And like, because of what? A new CEO came in and he said, I don't care about innovation and creating leaps or anything like that. All I want to do is 1+1. I just want to, continuously improve and get better from where we are. So that's what I mean by innovation debt is there's just always remnants of stuff. And you just kind of have to understand why that stuff happened and try to not make those same mistakes because you're going to have a lot of legacy employees that you have to kind of recreate buy-in for a reignition of another innovation program, practice, team, organization that's coming in.
What are some of the mistakes you made that actually set you up for success later on in your career around experience design, around innovation? Like, what are some of the things you had to learn by experience yourself that are now part of why you're so good at what you do?
I would say so good at what I do is a loose term. But thank you. Gosh, how many, it's funny. I was an athlete, in my former life and, we only share the good stuff on LinkedIn or, your resume. And it's like, hey, here's all the outcomes, people talk to me about like athletics sometimes and I'm like, they're like, oh my gosh, you won all these things. I'm like, do you have any idea the actual ratio of my losses to winnings throughout 20 years as an athlete? It's the same thing in my corporate life. There's been so many small failures. I think rather than giving you an example of a bunch of little failures, and I'm sure you've heard this, I'm sure people on this podcast has heard this, but it's really, really true. I'm a continuous learner. I've gone off and gotten 6 degrees and I think I'm done, but I don't know. Maybe I'll go back and get some more because I love learning and I love doing that kind of thing. The learning mentality applied to failures is probably the most important thing. So it's like having that type of mentality is what's important, not necessarily all the little failures. So it's like thinking about failure as a learning opportunity and not forgetting it and making the same mistake. It's that building that muscle that's important around failure. I'd say that's probably helped me more than anything else. It's just having that learning mentality applied to failures, not letting it get me down, not letting it break my passion or my spirit about excitement for the future and today. It's remembering those things and having that type of muscle and mentality that I think is the most important around failure.
Is that something you're teaching your teams, you're coaching them actively on? Is that something you can learn? How are you thinking about that?
I think it is something you can learn. I think there's people that are born with that type of mentality for sure. But I think it's something that over time you can learn and pick up that kind of muscle. I think it's like anything. Like I use athletics a lot because a lot of people like have been some sort of athlete or loved it or something. But it's like, hey, you didn't come out with being able to leg press 2,000 pounds. You weren't come out born like that. You were building muscles over 20 years. So of course you can like train your body and your mind to do something. I think being intentional and understanding the value of looking at things as learning opportunities and thinking positively about those experiences, I think you can train your mind and your heart over time by being intentional about wanting to do that. I think the first step is knowing its value and wanting to do it, and then being intentional along the way to continue to build that mindset and that muscle. So yes, I do that continuously. I'm always coaching them. Like we do quarterly goal setting, and I'm big on like continuous improvement and learning and that kind of thing from a goal perspective. And anytime we're in a retrospective, I'm like I use continue and consider. And it's just trying to frame things in a very positive way. Continue doing this because you're doing great. You got to focus on people's greatness and like champion those wins. But and the considerations are things like, hey, what can we learn from this? So it's having those conversations with your teams, not just with yourself. So if you're a people manager, it's like continue, like consider a learning opportunity, not, hey, you failed here, don't do it again. So like as a people leader, yeah, it's the way you frame conversations is very, very important. And it has, most of the people that I've brought onto my teams would come work to me. I more often than not bring people from other companies into my teams, wherever I'm going to work again. And I think it's because of, championing that type of spirit. The feedback that I get when I leave somewhere, is you made me believe in myself. And I think that as people managers, part of that is trying to encourage and having that type of language and framing for career growth for folks, having, training their minds and hearts to think in that way. I'm learning as I'm going through this journey, and my people leader is not focused on a negative failure.
Can we dig into framing a little bit? Because the other examples that you gave earlier on is like helping people to walk in their conductor's shoes, right?
Yeah.
That is also a way of framing what you want to get out of the meeting or the decision. But when we talk about the retros, like typically you have start, stop, continue, right? And you say like, no, you need to have continue versus consider. So framing seems to be a big theme running through the way you do things. Like, can you give some more examples of how you see framing as a tool in the toolkit that you have to help organizations do this experience design better?
There's probably a book on this. If there's not, there should be. And I've never thought about it.
If you want to write one, I would love to read it.
I've never thought about it that way. I think we've been dancing around a bunch of different examples loosely. So it's interesting that you've thought about it that way. Framing is important. It's empathy. We continue to hone in on, like, you got to empathize, and then the way that you frame, because you've empathized, you understand where people are coming from, and you can't talk to the same person the same way you talk to another. Like, you just can't do that. Like, my friends, my family, I know that there's my personal relationships. I know that, Jackie has a trigger around something. I'm going to be careful and frame things because I'm empathizing with that person. So
Jackie is your wife, just to be clear?
No. I made that up hypothetically.
Okay.
My wife's name was Christina. I would never throw her under the bus with a trigger that I'm not doing. Right. So it's like, sympathizing and framing and just being intentional about the way that you're engaging with folks. I think it's really, really important. And it's, I've never thought about it that way. And it's something maybe I do inherently. And I'm never great at it all the time. I mess up a lot from that perspective, and you continuously learn. That's when you're going on a relationship journey. That's another way to think about things. You're in a relationship continuously. You're building this relationship over time. You're building a relationship with Amtrak. You're building a relationship with your customers. It's like, how am I treating every interaction as a relationship where I'm growing and learning from it and meeting people where they are? And it's continuously framing how I approach someone. And I know that when I go have a lunch meeting with XYZ person on Tuesday is going to be completely different than the lunch meeting I have on Thursday. And it doesn't mean you don't bring your authentic self. It's about respect and empathy for the person that you're in a relationship with. I don't know.
I think this is a thread worth pulling a little bit further. So if we think about the actual customer experience, and I'm now thinking about me as a consumer of Coca-Cola, and then traveling to my destination with Amtrak, right? Same person, completely different needs, completely different experiences. I can have those two brands at the same time. But when you were working at Coca-Cola and now you're working at Amtrak, like, how would you frame the differences in experience? Or what is the biggest difference that you've seen where how you organize teams, how you think about innovation, how you think about moving the business forward, all focused on the customer experience? Like, I can only imagine it's a completely different language. It's a completely different way of thinking about it, but I might be wrong. And it's the same micro moments we share. Like, if we talk about framing the differences between those experiences from those two company perspectives, or you can take any other company perspectives that you like, but like, how would you frame the differences between them? And what is the most striking?
We're framing again. I've worked at, Accenture, Coca-Cola, GE, very, very big companies, very legacy companies. So the complexity in those companies is the same. Their level of maturity around innovation, experience design, that's what's different. I think they're all like have this brand legacy, brand loyalty, advocacy, that kind of thing. Like GE was big on that, Coca-Cola is big on that, Amtrak's big on that. You can get into the conversations around, kind of micro moments versus moments that matter most. Micro moments were big for Coca-Cola, focused on D2C commerce because it was all about conversion and how do we do this new business. Where Amtrak is like where they are right now, they're focused on moments that matter most. Where it's bigger, it's like trying to create existential change for the way their brand's received. So I think it's more differences around that because the complexities of the companies were very similar. The way that they're siloed across functions because they've been around for 50 years. People, process, technology did. All three of them had that. I think it was very, very similar. And my approach was the outcome and the way I met them was different everywhere, but the way that I approached it was very, very consistent.
What is the biggest difference between a micro moment and a moment that matter? Because they seem similar. They seems to be used intertwined as well. I'm seeing many companies have a version of that, right? But if you would have to almost define them and make the biggest, well, how would you split them up? What's the difference between a micro moment, having a Coca-Cola, versus a moment that matter, like getting accurate information about my delayed train? I am only imagining these could be some, but how are you thinking about the difference?
I mean, I feel like it's very intricate, the difference. They are they're intertwined, interrelated, whatever enter you want to use there. In my experience, the way that micro moments have been kind of leveraged and articulated is more around kind of a transactional nature. So if I had to differentiate the two, I would say, my experience, micro moments are more transactional. How do I drive conversion of something in a micro moment? For me, moments that matter most, it's more about fostering a brand loyalty and advocacy for your company. So it's a little bit more existential or something. So that's the way I've always thought about it, is one, just how do I create brand loyalty over a lifetime, and what are the moments that matter most that drive that versus what is something that's, micro, it's in the name, right? Micro touch point within a journey that's got a very discrete KPI to it, like a conversion rate.
So micro moments are sitting in the journey, transactional, where moments that matter most can be the whole journey or multiple journeys leading up to that moment. Is actually that's the distinction, how you're thinking about it. Is that?
So. Yeah, and on a customer journey map, it could be literally when I'm trying to get out of my Uber or here's a better one. If I'm trying to order my lunch on the train, having food on the train is a moment that matters a lot to our ridership. And it's a differentiator for our company. That moment, that customer journey touch point, that is a moment that matters most. Knowing that people want to have a great meal on their train that you sometimes can't you can't do in a car necessarily. You can't do on a plane. You've got an opportunity area in that moment. And that's a moment that matters most, high level. A micro moment that exists in that is I can have my mobile phone and an experience that you give them within that moment. I'm going from, let's call it, I don't know, DC to New York, and halfway in between is Philly. And I want to, and the Amtrak, knowing that the moment that matters most, one of the moments that matter most in the customer journey on our train is having a really great meal. And we are able to do that in a different way than a car and an airplane. Cool. I know that if somebody's going from DC to New York, their midway point is Philly. Can I enable them on their phone to do a mobile order through Uber Eats to get the best Philly cheesesteak delivered in time to meet my train and is in an Uber Eats locker or Amazon locker that's housing my meal, and the conductor concierge jumps off the train or whatever, grabs this meal and brings it to the rider, and they get to have this relatively fresh, authentic Philly cheesesteak. on the train. It was enabled by that micro moment of the mobile order. They were able to self-serve what they wanted, when they wanted, in that journey that we call a moment that matters most. The micro moment is enabling them to meet them where they are with what they want, whenever they want it.
So
Does
this
that
is
make
happening in Amtrak trains all over the country right now? This
It's
is
certainly
possible?
something that the innovation team has been planting seeds on, I'll say.
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of people very happy when that happens seamless and you can rely on it, right? It's also the trusting, like, will it be in time? Is it going to be warm? Am I going to be enjoying it? Like,
it certainly sets Amtrak up for a potential catastrophe from a brand loyalty advocacy perspective, because you can really mess that up. But what's the point if you're not going to strive for these like North Star moments and moments that matter most and delighting your customer? If you're not striving for that because you're afraid to fail, then I don't know what's the point in doing anything. Let's just keep moving them from point A to point B and just get them on a train that's just always on time. That's it. It's nothing else, An always on time on wheels. I think they're striving for more than that.
That is the basic, but if you don't meet the basics, then you can't fix the higher up experience and the moments that matter around the food, I guess. So
you sound like the chief operating officer. I like it. If you can't meet the basics, then we can't actually do any of this. And you're very, very right. You're very, very right. You got to figure out how to do both of those things in parallel. You can't do one without the other, and they're intertwined, just like micro moments and moments that matter most.
Exactly. It reminds me of like telcos, right? They have churn every year because network coverage is crap, and it's hard to prevent that. It will just happen. But the way they communicate around this and make sure that people are aware that they are in areas where there's lower coverage, like you can do a lot by focusing on, in this case, the micro moment of like losing coverage, by making that end-to-end experience fantastic. So they don't go like, oh, I'm going to never like take this subscription again. I'm going to go to another provider. And I think it's the same for what you're describing here.
Yeah, exactly.
Ryan, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for taking me through your vast experience and all these like examples. I absolutely loved it. Is there anything that you want to say to people listening before we leave today?
The world's volatile, and as experienced practitioners, especially, never let go of empathy in your daily life, in your work. It's a differentiator for, a better world. So just never let go of that. As you're learning professional language and understanding the bottom line and the impact from dollars and cents, empathy is huge in everything you do. It helps you build the relationships you're talking about. It helps you meet companies where they are. It helps you meet your writers where they are. It's your differentiator in life. So keep it up. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Ryan, where can people find you? I don't know if you take more people you are mentoring right now, or if they think like, yes, you got the skills that we need as a team. How can they find you, learn from you, engage with you? What's the best place to find you?
I guess through LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on there. So, just Google my name here on LinkedIn, and never hesitate to reach out. I do a lot of mentorings at the universities that I've matriculated through, keep in touch with the companies. It's one of my passions. So if there's ever anything, I love helping. There's like different times in your life. Like somebody just told me this the other day, you got a time to learn and a time to earn and a time to like basically give back. And I feel like I'm in that moment where I really want to help folks on their journey. So just don't hesitate to reach out and find me on LinkedIn.
All right. We're going to put links to this in the show notes, and we're going to speak again when your book on reframing customer experience is coming out. I'll hold you to it. And Ryan, until then, it was fantastic to have you on.
You too, man. Ciao.
All right, and that's it. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable today, don't forget to subscribe to The Experience Edge on your favorite podcast channel, leave a review, and share it with your team. I'd be delighted. Today's episode was brought to you by Daydo, the AI journey management solution for enterprise. To have an edge on your business strategy and to know why your customers do what they do, visit daydo.com and explore more resources to accelerate your customer experience game. And remember, the journey to creating customer-centric impact never ends, and here's always a new edge to discover in doing things differently. Next week, new episode. Until then, keep pushing the edge and stay inspired. See you in the next episode.